Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Today I thought I would talk a little bit about when we want to put it back on a stone and when we don't want to put it back on a stone. And also at the same time maybe make a pretty ring. We'll talk about the pros and cons and how different stones affect that. I picked out a pretty gel Ethiopian opal, which would be a good test piece for that. Some other stones that oftentimes I wonder whether they'll look better with or without a back are labradorite and moonstone, and some other kinds of translucent stones that allow sunlight through. There can be a significant difference in whether they look good or not. So we'll make a pretty ring today. And before we get started, I need to thank some groups of people. The first group of people I'd like to thank are my patrons over on Patreon. They are my core group of supporters, and I truly appreciate their contributions, not only the environment that they've created on Patreon for my group there, but also for the financial support. And just being able to tap into their know-how and their creative ideas is useful to me as well. I really do appreciate your support, so thank you for that. I have a couple of new ones. Actually, one's a returning one and one's a new one, but thank you to Daniel I. and Elizabeth W. I really appreciate it. I think you'll find that it's a really nice group of people over there, so make sure to get to know some of them and sign up for my Discord server and everything. So, all right, well, the other group is my YouTube subscribers, and we just passed 25,400. I think we're pretty close to 500 now. That's amazing. Thank you for that. I really appreciate the nice comments and the super thanks and the buy me a coffees and the merch purchases and the people who buy my ebook. All of that stuff makes my channel sustainable, and I probably couldn't do it without your help, so thank you for that. All right, well, let's talk about back or no back and maybe make a pretty ring. So this is one of my design idea sketchbooks that you can get on my merch store. I have a number of different models. This one has a gauge to inches to millimeters chart on the back. Some of the other ones have different charts or information about metalsmithing. What I really like about them, though, is the stop matrix in the background. It helps me to draw better pictures. And I filled up, I don't know, 4 of these or 5 of these now. Ever since I started doing the YouTube channel. I think they're a great way to keep track of your projects. So get yourself 1 or 2 of those. This is kind of what I had in mind today. I have this pretty Ethiopian opal here. I don't know if the camera will pick up the light play in it or not right here, but it is a nice one. It's kind of a gel one where they're really transparent. A lot of Ethiopian opals are that way. And this one's about 20 millimeters by 10, I would guess. Maybe 20 by 12-ish. By 12, let's call it. Alright, so we're going to put it in a pretty simple setting. I like kind of simple classic designs. I kind of think of this as like a implied ball motion kind of design, because I'm going to put a silver ball at the end on either side here with kind of a tapered swoosh made out of triangle wire. And I think that'll be pretty, and it kind of looks like it's spinning around it. For materials, I'm going to use this is 3.6 millimeter triangle wire. I know a lot of places overseas it's hard to find triangle wire, so seems to me like a good business opportunity for you if you can find a way to manufacture that and sell it. I'm going to use low dome half round. This is 5.8 millimeters wide or so. I don't remember which half round number it is from Rio, but I'm going to use 3/16 inch fine silver bezel strip. And that is 4.76 millimeters, and it's 26 gauge, which is 0.41 millimeters. So it's a little bit thicker, so I want to protect the opal a little bit since opals are a little bit delicate. I'm always a little nervous when I'm setting opals too. So the big question here is going to be, do I put a back on it or do I put an open back on it? And my guess is going to be that we're going to put a back on it. So I kind of drew up what I'd use would be 22 gauge. And I grabbed a piece of sheet here. The way to test would be you put it on the back of your finger. You can see how it looks, because that's what you'd be looking at if if you saw it on someone's hand, if it has an open back. To me, it just amplifies my wrinkles on my fingers, which isn't necessarily ideal. And to me, I get a lot more light reflection back, and I think it would be even more if I have a polished piece of sheet underneath it. So I think in this case, the way the light comes through, it looks better to me when it's on some silver than it does when it's on just skin like that. So it looks more purpley on skin because of the color of my skin. So I guess everybody's skin tone's a little different, so it's going to look different on different people. But I think I'm going to go with the sheet on the back. So I'm going to use 22 gauge sheet, which is a little thicker than I sometimes use, but not as thick as the thickest that I keep around. So let's make a bezel for that first using this 26 gauge bezel strip. Supposing I can find that little piece I have left over here. I have a little piece off of the previous spool, but I can't lay my hands on it right at the moment. Likely we'll file this down a little bit shorter. I generally keep this around because it's a good generic size that fits most things, and you can make it shorter if you need to. File the end flat. Let's see if we can make a nice oval shape here. I really like Ethiopian opals. Edge here. Opals can be kind of fragile. They're a little bit on the soft side, and they're prone to environmental interactions. They have actually water trapped inside of their crystal structure, which is part of the reason they have that color plate in them. Some people keep them stored in water in order to keep them from drying out too much. It's interesting, some when you wet them down, they will change how they look completely. And then I had a piece, Mexican opal one time, that was kind of like a vein running through matrix. And when you wet it down, it became very white with sparklies. And then when it was drier than that, it was more blue, kind of lines and stuff running through it. It was interesting to see the change between these two. So, I'm certainly not an opal expert, but I do like them. So let's make this into kind of a rectangular shape or a square shape. Should go about 2/3 of the way down, then about halfway down the longer side, make myself a kind of a squared off U shape, and then bend these two in to meet in the middle somewhere. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I do want to push these past each other like that in order to make the bottom a little springy so that these two ends are pushing together nicely. I asked in my last video if anybody knew why I had the band I was making if I pushed them past, and one person answered and had the right general idea. Because if you don't have some forward pressure when you're soldering something together like this, as you heat it, it's going to anneal a little bit, and the metal will soften and slump a bit, and then sometimes it pulls apart if it's just barely together. So you want some forward pressure, so even when it relaxes, it just kind of stays together even if it's softened up a little bit. So it prevents you from having a little gap in your bezel, which is embarrassing for everybody. Nobody wants a gappy bezel. Although if you look in like a lot of, not usually like fine jewelry stores, but some stores that sell imported stuff from some various places around the world, sometimes the bezels are really, really badly made. Big cracks in them or overlapped with each other and stuff. Although to be fair, I see people who are hobbyists who have bezels that look like that too. And when I first started, I probably had stuff like that as well. So it's just part of the learning process. Alright, let's get that all fluxed and crusty. Put a little piece of solder right across that gap. We really want these two to reach the same temperature on either side, the flow temperature of the solder at about the same time. If one side reaches it before the other side, the solder usually just jumps to that side that's reached the soldering temperature. And that's going to result in not a very good solder joint. So, now all of your silversmithing friends would secretly talk about you and your imperfect bezels. Alright, so I'm going to try to shape this into an oval. I always put the solder joint on an oval kind of on the long part of the oval, because you don't have to bend it as far, and usually the solder joint's a little bit stiffer than the rest of it. You want to be a little careful when you're checking the size on the bezel for an opal. Don't really want to force it down if it's really tight. And luckily it's just about the right size. So got lucky on that one. There's just a little tiny bit of extra there, which is fine with me for an opal. So, alright. So I need to make the components that are going to go around it too. And I have, like I said, 3.6mm triangle wire, which I think will make for kind of a cool thing. But I need to taper it to go from about, let's see about how long it needs to be. Here about here to about here. And you curve it around, so maybe call it about that far. Right there, so we need to taper that so it gets narrower along the whole length. It's going to be a little bit easier to file probably while I hold it, or if I keep it attached to the longer piece here, because it gives me more to hold on to. And I might put some of those finger cuts on, because filing has a tendency to trash my fingers a little bit. So I'll be right back. You can see I'm tapering it downwards a little bit too, so that it stays kind of a triangle wire, but gradually gets to be a smaller and smaller triangle wire. So, alright. I'm going to work on that just a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to take the Dremel and use a white abrasive polish and really kind of smooth that out so it looks more consistent. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this off right about here. We'll file that end flat. Actually, let's measure for the next piece so I can have them to be exact. So I'll probably file the second one off camera, but we can go ahead and try and bend this one a little bit and see how it looks. So I need to bend this pretty sharply. I'm thinking it might be easier to get some leverage if I use my miter vise jig to kind of hold it. Maybe. That way maybe I can kind of just this is far longer than I need, I guess. Sometimes I'll make a mark when I'm trying to bend this to get it, to know where to hold the pliers to bend it. Kind of like that. I'm going to file this more to a taper on this end now, and then I'll do the other one off camera. That's pretty good. I'll probably do a little shape refining, but I'm going to go ahead and file the second one, and then I'll work on getting them to fit nicely. Okay, I got both of those pretty similar. I'm going to need to bend this one in just a tiny bit on the end. this one too, just a skosh. Okay, so that's kind of how I'm going to solder them together when I get to that stage. But we need to make a couple little balls to match the little balls we have on the design. Alright, so I got a couple of balls there. I found some square wire I had that has some dinged up end on it, so I think I'll use that to make a couple of little balls. We'll do it on the chocolate block. Try and get them pretty close anyway. Could weigh them, I suppose, if you want to get them exact. Charcoal blocks make for better balls. They tend to have a nice flat bottom on them if you're going to use them for purposes where you're going to solder them to something. If you want rounder ones, you can actually use a little ball burr to carve little cavities in the charcoal block so it ends up more of a roundy bottom. But honestly, there are a few times where you need that, but I think this one's a tiny bit smaller than that one. I'm going to add just a little bit of solder, or a little bit of silver to it if I can find a little piece. Get back there. Maybe trying to run away on me. With balls, if you heat them not just to where they barely melt, but until they get really hot after they've melted, and then let them cool, you tend to get a nicer surface on them for some reason. And if you do end up getting a rough surface, you can always remelt them and do that again. I kind of want them to be not perfectly centered, but just slightly beyond there, so it gives it more of a motion sort of thing going on. And that looks pretty good. So that kind of gives me an idea about how big of a piece of sheet I need. Like I said, I was going to use 22 for the back, which is this. So if we kind of make a mark right here, and about right there, that'll get us pretty close. I'm going to get this nice and flat, hopefully. Make sure it's pretty flat. Try and get this kind of centered over that X. Just double check the stone. Make sure. Yeah, just fine. I think let's solder that down first. So I have some solder right here. If you're interested in my solder and my torch and everything, here's some information about that. quite a bit more mass in the bottom piece here than there is in the bezel itself. And so, as is typical with bezels, you have to kind of avoid the bezel with the heat while you're trying to get that other piece up to the soldering temperature. The bezel, just being in the flame here, will reach that temperature pretty quickly. But ideally, you want both pieces to reach that soldering temperature at about the same time, if you can. If you have a tendency to melt your bezel on top of your piece of sheet, that's usually because the sheet has never reached that, and you overheated the bezel itself on top, which is easy to do, especially when there's more mass in the bottom. Some ways to avoid that, if you want. I have a tendency, when something this isn't super huge yet, when you get a really big one, sometimes it helps if you kind of lift it up from underneath and heat from below. Heat from underneath, that way the bezel isn't exposed to heat directly from the flame. But the bottom sheet gets really hot really fast, and the bezel itself, just by being in contact with that, will get pretty hot. So when you start to see the solder flow like it just started to, set it back down and just kind of continue heating the whole upper part. Try not to focus too much in one area. And you got a nice flow all the way around. Let's get everything lined up here and flux it, and we'll see if we can't get it soldered on there. Let's cut a little fresh solder. You could sweat some on the bottom of these if you wanted to. That would work as well. I'm just going to lean some to the outside since we're going to trim that off anyway. I'm going to try to file the bottoms of these balls a little flatter. One way you can do that is that'll elevate the miter vise jig just a little bit so I can get that so the little ball is sticking out a tiny bit. That'll make it easier to hold while we file a little bit of a flat spot on it. And we get an overall better result, I think, if we have a flat bottom on it. Alright, we got two nice flat bottoms there. So let's see if we can get those lined up nice here. So let's flux those and solder those in. I have plenty of solder over here. So. Alright, I'm going to do something called pick soldering now, where I pick up a little bit of solder on the pick and then place it when I get the piece up to the right soldering temperature. And it should just jump from the pick on there, so we'll see if we can do that. It's a really useful technique if you're interested in learning how to do it. Put a link right there for you. It's one of those skills that really kind of moves you up a level. So it's worth finding out how to do it. After you solder the balls on, you always want to really try and pry them off. So you want to make sure you have both pieces up to the soldering temperature with the disparity in the mass between the two. It's much harder to get the overall piece up to soldering temperature, especially when, as I just noticed, my torch is getting low. Okay, let's cool that off and see that everything's still on there good. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that off and then let it pickle for a little bit while we make a band. And then I'll just continue with my filing, and I may use a ball burr or something to grind the rest of that away. I want to cut a band, and this is that low dome. I measured to about an 8.5 here. So this is going to be slightly long for an 8.5, but I'll file it down or cut it off if I need to. I always estimate a little on the bigger side when I'm doing something like this. So let me get this file back on both ends. So whenever I'm doing something, this is going to have an open top. It's going to split at the top, and we're going to file it flat so that it sits nice, so that this piece sits nicely on top of the band. So I'm going to start near the top of the near the top of the mandrel. Okay, so I want to file this flat here. So I'm going to use my miter vise jig. I wish I'd had these when I was younger. They're really handy for some things. What do you think? Should we try it? It's the worst thing that could happen, right? So again, I'm trying to make sure that the bezel underneath reaches soldering temperature, because it's a lot harder to get that up to the soldering temperature than it is this band that's sitting up all exposed to the heat. So. Okay, I'm going to let that pickle for a while, and then we'll get it all cleaned up and we'll set that stone. One thing I am going to do, though, is I'm going to find some... So if I had some argentium silver, I would cut a piece just the same size as this because it really doesn't oxidize. But all I have is a little tiny piece, and it's not big enough for this. So I'm going to take some sterling, and I'm going to polish it really to a high sheen, and we'll use that right underneath the stone. So I'm going to do that while this is pickling and get it all polished up, and then we'll trim it off. And that'll be a nice reflective surface behind there. Argentium doesn't tarnish at all, really, so that's ideal. For this one, it probably won't very much because it'll be sealed in there. But if it ever does, you can remove the stone and repolish it. So the bottom here, I'm never going to get it perfectly clean because I got little solder, bits of solder on it and stuff. So I'll get that stuff done and we'll come back in a bit. Okay, we got everything cleaned up. I put that shiny piece of silver in there. I do this a little differently than some. I use my chain nose pliers to do this part. I'm just going to use it as a bezel pusher first. Okay, now very carefully I'm going to use my rounded part here and just gently burnish that top edge. You don't want to slip and scratch the opal. So that's kind of what I was shooting for. And again, I think it's much more vibrant now that we put a shiny piece of sheet metal behind it. So, but experiment with different stones and see whether they look better with something behind it or just skin behind it. So I'll get some better pictures and put that at the end. So. Okay, well that was an Ethiopian opal ring. I hope you enjoyed the process of making that, and if you did, make sure to hit the like button before you go. That really helps to get my channel promoted. And I would love it if you would go over to my main YouTube page and check out some of the other videos I have. I do 3 per week, one on Tuesday, one on Thursday, one on Saturday. And because of that, since I've been doing this for almost 4 years, there's about 650 videos over there. And that's not even including my Patreon exclusive videos. So you're almost certain to find something useful or interesting over there. There's all different skill levels and there's lots of project ideas. So check it out. Make sure to subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. There's no cost to that. But it does allow you to know when a new video has been released. I'd love to have you do that too. You can check out the video description down below for some important links. There's a link to my Patreon if you want to find out more about that community and the different tiers of membership there. The lowest one being, of course, getting rid of all the YouTube advertisements, so that's always kind of nice. The other ones have some other privileges like live streams and specific tutorials just for Patreon. So check that out. There's a link to my merch store if you want to get yourself one of those nice design idea sketchbooks that I talked about. They're really useful for keeping track of your projects, and the dot matrix makes a nice way to help me keep my pictures a little bit more symmetrical. And finally, there's a link to my ebooks. I'm working on 2025s right now, which will be a guide to all of the video tutorials I did in 2025. Typically, it ends up being over 170. I have an ebook for 2023 and an ebook for 2024. Each one has a page for each of the videos that includes a picture of the drawing that I drew, a picture of the final product, a list of materials, a difficulty rating, and a bunch of notes I made about the project, as well as a link right to the video. So it's a great way to have a whole bunch of projects at your fingertips and a super nice way to support my channel. So thank you in advance for that if you choose to do that. You can even get 2023s and 2024s as a package deal and you save a little bit of money. So check that out. And look for 2025s after the first of the year. So we're working desperately to get that put together. So, all right, well, thanks for watching today. Take care. Happy silversmithing.